Hello everyone, I'm Mojtaba and welcome to another episode of A Sip of Chemistry. In this episode, you will hear from Josef Zwanziger, a chemistry professor from Dalhousie University. He is the Canada researcher in nuclear magnetic resonance studies of material and is particularly interested in exploring the relationship between chemical bonding in glasses and their optical properties. Theoretical model and solid-state NMR are also central to his research activities. In June 2024, he visited Winnipeg for the CSC Conference, where I had the opportunity to engage in a friendly conversation with him. I found him to be a humble and knowledgeable person and thoroughly enjoyed our discussion. Please stay tuned and watch this exciting interview with Josef Zwanziger. Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for agreeing doing this interview. I'm excited about it. I'm happy that you are here in Winnipeg. I would love to come to your office at University of Dalhousie, Halifax, but it was an opportunity for me to meet you here at the CSC Conference in Winnipeg and have this nice conversation with you. So would you walk us through your education and where did you get your degrees?
Well, I'm American. I grew up in the United States. I grew up on the east part of Washington State, east of the mountains. It's very much like Lethbridge, Alberta, same kind of thing. But I went to college at the University of Chicago and got a chemistry degree. And then I did my Ph.D. in chemistry at Cornell University, which is in upstate New York. I postdoced at the University of California, Berkeley, working with Alex Pines. And then after that, I went to Indiana University, and that's where I had my first faculty job. So that was in 1990. I started college in 1979, and then started at Indiana University in 1990.
Awesome. And what did you work on during your graduate study?
Well, as a graduate student, I worked on the Jahn-Teller effect in small molecules. I did molecular spectroscopy in beams, and I did a lot of theory that involved what's called geometric phases or Berry phases in molecules. And then when I went to do my postdoc in NMR, I changed completely.
Okay. So initially you didn't work on glasses, right?
No.
Okay. So how did you become interested in glass science?
So I started working on glass when I started at Indiana University. I hadn't worked on it at all with Alex at Berkeley. I did do NMR. And when I got to Indiana, I had some new tools that I had helped in a minor way develop at Berkeley. And I wanted to apply them to really different problems that people weren't doing that kind of NMR on. And I also wanted personally to change directions into a field where I felt like there were really, really big unknowns. So when I was doing molecular spectroscopy, it kind of felt like you knew the basic problem that had to be solved, and then you had to find the parameters that solved it. But in glass science, there were problems that felt like nobody even knew how to ask the right question. And that's what I wanted to work on.
From your point of view, what's a glass?
Well, as you know, that's something that gets talked about quite a bit. To my best understanding at the moment, a glass is it's a condensed state of matter where a liquid has undergone kind of a kinetic arrest. So it's condensed into a kinetically trapped state. I don't think it's clear whether there's also a thermodynamic transition at the heart of it. I think the answer is probably not, but I think that's not absolutely clear. But what is pretty clear is that the kinetic arrest is so complete that the material ends up acting like an elastic solid.
Mm. That's amazing. It's been 1,000 years since the discovery of the glass, and several, I don't know, 100 years of scientific examination of study of glasses, and still it's something mysterious.
To some extent, yeah. It's funny because in some ways, it's one of the states of matter that everybody, including non-scientists, feel like, oh, they know what it is, and they kind of can point to examples of it. But it's one of the states of matter that we probably know less about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, maybe there's exotic quantum states that are stranger, but in terms of an ordinary state of matter, it's a pretty odd state.
So you have worked on various compositions, I mean, different glass systems. But telluride glasses, that's something more highlighted in your research work. So would you tell us more about these glasses, and why are you interested in these types of glasses?
I got interested in tellurites because as a chemist by background, it's interesting to kind of work at the edge of where the chemical ideas start to break down a little bit. And the lighter elements like silica and boron oxide have relatively simple bonding because the number of orbitals that are available are so minimal, frankly. Tellurium has a lot of accessible orbitals, so it can do more. The chemistry is richer, and so it's also hard to study. So there was some interest there, and so it seemed like a good place to try to push what we could understand about why a system would form a glass or not form a glass.
Yeah, exactly. I like these types of questions in glass science, glass forming ability. Yeah, that's something interesting for me. One of the valuable achievements in your research is that you made lead-free glasses, lead-free telluride glasses, right? Would you tell us more about it, and why is it important?
Sure. So those actually, you can do that with tellurium oxide, but that wasn't really the initial motivation. The motivation there, I had a friend who was working for the Schott company, and she encouraged us to work on this problem because there are commercial products where the optical properties of the glass are very interesting when you consider them as a function of pressure on the glass. She had encouraged us to work on this problem, and the idea is that you have some glass compositions where the optical response when the glass is stressed doesn't change much from when it's in the unstressed state. And the classic way to do that was with glass with a high lead content. But because of the restriction of hazardous substances directive from the European Union, a lot of companies were under a lot of pressure to try to develop analogs that were free from lead, and nobody knew how to do that. And so we got really involved in that project, and we learned a lot about lead chemistry in glasses, and we figured out what the sort of directing structure is, and in that way came up with a design rule to make glass that has the optical property we want but doesn't have lead in it at all. So you can do it with tin, you can do it with a number of other P-block elements that had not been tested or considered. And the design rule that we came with not only suggests what element to try, it tells you how much of it to use, and it gets it right. So it tells you what recipe to use to make the glass with the optical property that you want.
Okay, amazing. In addition to experimental activity, you also are involved in theory and modeling and do computational chemistry. Would you tell us about this aspect of your research?
Yeah, ever since, I mean, as I mentioned, when I was a graduate student, I worked on geometric phases in quantum mechanics, which is kind of abstract, but I really enjoy that kind of mathematical approach. And so when techniques became available to calculate NMR responses in solids, I got very excited, got back into that field, and sort of started developing our own theories for how to do those calculations. So I've implemented into the Abinit code, which is one of the various choices of density functional codes you can use in solids, processes to calculate a lot of what we measure in the lab in the NMR spectrometer. And to be honest, some of that was a little bit selfish. As you get to be a more senior professor, you have less and less time to do anything in the lab. And if you want to actually do something yourself, it was easier to do some of it on the computer, because then I could run some things at home, do some things on the weekend. I didn't have to have hours in the lab just trying to get an experiment to work. Now, having said that, I have spent hours and hours not in the lab trying to get the code to work and the theory to work. So it feels like it's easier, but in reality, it's just the same.
Yeah, I understand. And I think that it's takes more effort and concentration and focus than just working in lab, mixing ingredients and make glasses.
I don't know. I wouldn't agree with that. It's just different. It's both take a lot of thought, a lot of trial and error, a lot of, you have to think through in both cases what's the right control experiment or calculation to do. Once you get something interesting, you should be trying hard to prove that it's wrong, because that's all you can do in science. You can't prove it's right. You can only find that it's not quite right. And so in both cases, you have to do that. And it's time consuming in both. I think I have a talent for doing it with the theory, so I do that. But they're the same. They're not easy, either one.
My next question is about making a comparison between the challenges we face during experimental activity and modeling and theory. I can understand in experimental activity, I have a composition, for example, phosphate glasses, it corrodes the crucible. What challenges you faced during doing this modeling and theory?
Well, there's sort of different kinds. I mean, one of the things that I've done in using the code that we work with is that I have also helped to actually develop the theories that then get implemented. So developing the theory is kind of a mathematical process, which has its challenges, and then you have to sort of keep checking yourself as you go with whether what you're developing is consistent and makes sense. And then the next level is that once then there's the whole level of implementing it and testing at each stage that you've implemented it correctly. And then finally, once it's implemented and working, then you are at the stage of modeling things. And at the modeling level, you have to bear in mind over and over and over what compromises had been made in the theory. What exactly are you calculating? There's any number of examples where, like with standard density functional theory for solids, if you're doing it right, you know, because of the approximations that have been made, that you should not get exactly the experimental result for certain properties, that they should be off by 1% or 2% in one direction or another because of the approximations that got made in the density functional process. And you have to be aware of that. You have to take that on board.
Considering the development in artificial intelligence and machine learning, to which degree you think that we don't need to do any experimental activity? I'm talking about the glass science specifically.
Sure.
A project can be designed and you can get the results that you may expect?
That's I think that's a hard question, and my take on it would be sort of the following: that if your objective is to make a glass with certain properties because of an application, and you really don't care why the glass has those properties, then I think a machine learning approach is probably going to be very helpful in quickly narrowing down your test cases. At the end of the day, you'll have to make the glass and test it.
Yeah.
Because, what goes into a solid state battery is not AI code. It's stuff. It's actual material. And that has to be tested. But the machine learning approach might help speed or narrow the search window a lot. But what I do or try to do in the lab is not to make glass that has certain properties for an application. It's to understand why a glass would have that property at all. I don't see machine learning being nearly as helpful in that quest. The closest I would get to that would be to say, well, maybe it would help me sort of quickly identify exceptions. Where would the outliers possibly be? But I don't know enough about machine learning, honestly, to be able to say whether that's a possible question for it to answer. In other words, it may end up being designed not to find outliers by its very construction. I don't really know. But in my own work, we're not using those approaches at all because we don't feel like they're addressing the kind of questions that we want to address.
Okay, I understand that. When it comes to the properties, it may be useful to predict where it goes but why?
Right.
Yeah. How did you like the CSC conference so far? The NMR symposium, that's tomorrow.
Right.
But the poster session, it was last night, and
Right.
I guess you have checked the abstracts. Is there any specific thing you would like to talk about it?
Well, it's to be blunt, it seems like a kind of a small. It's a small NMR symposium, but it's a small overall conference. I think I've been to many CSC conferences over the years, and it does seem like a relatively small one. I mean, I kind of expected that post-COVID things would be smaller, but for example, last year in Vancouver, I think last year was Vancouver, it seemed quite a bit larger, and I don't quite know why that is.
Winnipeg is a small city, maybe.
I don't know. It's I mean, there were some good posters yesterday, and I think there'll be some good talks tomorrow. But in past years, the NMR sessions have been there's been just more days of it.
I have another question. I like the question. So you've been involved in glass science, glass research in Canada for many years. How do you see the relation between the industry and academia in glass science in Canada?
In Canada, honestly, as far as I can see, there is almost no relationship. And the reason for that is that there's almost no, as far as I know, there is no glass production in Canada. There is almost no glass industry in Canada. There are trade organizations that are focused on architectural glass, windows, things like that. But it's not manufactured in Canada, and there is nothing in Canada like the big value-added glass companies like Corning, Schott, O'Hara, Pilkington, CGDM in China, and so forth. There's nothing like that in this country. So there are several groups, academic groups in Canada doing, I think, pretty good glass science, but there's very little. As far as I know, all of us who do it that have academic industrial connections all have them with companies or labs outside of Canada.
Okay, so how do you see the capacity for entrepreneurship work on glass science? I mean, on for example, a startup for a high-tech glass application. How do you see the capacity in Canada? Is there any way that
pretty minimal? Honestly, just pretty minimal.
Yeah, in comparison to the United States,
Yeah, to the companies that already exist in the U.S. and Europe and Japan, glass is well, you'd have to have a glass composition of some absolutely spectacular property, which only needed to be produced in a tiny quantity in order for it to be effective in a country like Canada.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be negative. I mean, this is just sort of the geographic reality of a very small country, population-wise, that doesn't have any long tradition in that area. If you look at the successful companies like Corning or Pilkington or stuff like that, I mean, these are countries that go back, I don't know, 100 years or more in whitewares and ceramics and dishes, and then they branch out later into high value added cover glass and fibers and things like that.
Yeah, that's true. You are the chair of magnetic resonance in material science in Canada, and I think you have contributed a lot in the NMR and glass science. Yeah, I think you are humble that you say
I
something.
just try to do something interesting.
I have a silly question about another aspect of your job. You used to be the editor-in-chief of the non-crystalline solids journal, right?
Well, for some years, I was one of the senior editors for the Journal of Physical Chemistry, and then for another 10 years, I was one of the editors. There were 4 of us together on the Journal of Non-Crystalline Solids.
Yeah. So I'm under the impression that I had this discussion with Scott Kroeker that why the results and discussion section should be separated. It's a trivial question. For my curiosity, I see that in most of the journal, they say that it should be separate. I think you are a fan of separating them, right?
Well, so at least for the Journal of Non-Crystalline Solids, historically, that decision had come from, I believe it was when Bob Weeks was the editor, and he was the editor for many, many years, from like the 70s and 80s or so. And he, when he was the editor, when I was an editor, we were kind of managing the process. When he was the editor, he was actually editing the papers himself. I mean, reading and making comments on the writing himself, all of them. And I think he must have found that to be an easier structure to follow, to have them separated. In my opinion, so when I was the editor, we were sort of relatively easygoing on that. I don't think it's a bad habit to separate them. It can work both ways. What I was sort of adamant about was that a paper has to have a conclusions section, which isn't a summary, it's conclusions. You got to be able to state in fairly simple sentences, what did you actually learn or accomplish in the paper? Not just reiterating what happened in the paper, but bullet points, basically what actually got tested, what hypothesis got tested, and what did you learn there? A lot of papers they don't do that because I'm not sure the authors are 100% clear on what they actually learned. And not everything works, you
Yeah.
know? So that's the answer to that.
Okay. And another question I have somehow related to this one is that uh, if you receive a paper for refereeing, I mean for the journal, uh, which kind of mistakes or problems, if you see, you immediately reject the paper?
Well, so in there are several in the Journal of Non-Crystalline Solids, which I'm not a senior, I'm not an editor there anymore, but I was up till fairly recently.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, the two kinds of things that I would most routinely reject without review was, well, three things. One would be that the paper just simply wasn't within the scope of the journal. It would be, I don't know, something about a crystal compound or just something that it just wasn't part of what the journal was for. The second thing would be when a paper, basically they were just restating something they basically already published. And then the third thing in that journal that would come up the most would be that they made a glass, but they did not test what it was after they had made it.
Mm-hmm.
So they would be doing, I don't know, like a fairly aggressive melt, like a borate or a phosphate in an alumina crucible. Yeah. And not test it afterwards. And I would say, look, I know from personal experience that glass has to have a decent chunk of alumina in it. It just has to. And you have to check for that. And so that would be something where we'd reject without review.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good to know. Mm-hmm. So let's go to beyond the lab. I have a few questions that usually I ask the researchers, professors, the same questions. What do you do at your spare time?
I do some sports. I do a lot of curling in the winter. I do CrossFit all year to try to keep in shape. My wife and I bicycle together and go hiking quite a bit.
Just all of them for fun, or you do them professionally?
Oh, no, I'm certainly not good enough to do any of them professionally. I do all of them for fun. I mean, the most competitive I get is with curling, and even that's just like recreational tournaments around Nova Scotia. Nothing special.
Amazing. What was your dream job when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a musician. I played the cello. I had lessons and summer camps and orchestras and all that kind of thing. And so that's what I thought I would become. But then I went to the university and changed.
Yeah. Did you pursue it? I mean, for your interest, anything?
Not really. The town that I grew up in was a small town, and I wasn't at that time active in sports at all, so there wasn't much to do in high school. We didn't have a lot of academic programs, but what we did have, the university there had an extremely good music department and music education department. And so they were very active in promoting orchestra and classical music training, and I did all of that. I really, really enjoyed it. But then I got to university, and then it was open. I could do anything.
Yeah.
And so then I changed into chemistry at that.
In an imaginary world, what's your job?
How imaginary do you want the world to be? I mean,
another world, a parallel world. I don't know if you could.
If I weren't a chemistry professor, knowing my personality, I would probably still be a professor, but I think I might be in mathematics.
Close to, I think, what you have done. I mean, the modeling and theory, right?
Yeah, something fairly abstract.
Okay. Yeah. If a time machine existed, would you go 100 years earlier or later?
You know, you warned me you would ask me that, and I thought a lot about this. And I would not do either one. To me, I mean, this is kind of a personal statement. Everything leads to now, and you have to try to do your best and understand right now. And that's enough. That's hard enough. And so I would not change that.
Okay, excellent.
It doesn't mean I did everything right or everything wrong, but everything was as it was, and now it's now, and now we have to deal with the present.
Yeah. And who is your favorite scientist in the history?
Well, I think on the experimental side, it would be Michael Faraday. And on the theory side, it would be Albert Einstein. As I think on the experimental side, Faraday was amazing, just amazing at doing the right measurements at the right time and finding connections. And Einstein, because he had this clarity of vision that is very hard ever to replicate, just to understand what has to be so because of what the experiments suggest, and then following that through.
Thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed it. And anything else you would like to add?
No, thank you. It's nice that you do this. I hope people find some value in some
of course. And hopefully I can meet you in University of Dalhousie and see your lab.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.